I'm Stephanie Boozer, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's CUGC Connect with Citrix, talking about service continuity and learning how to protect your users from Citrix DaaS outages. But before we jump into that, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. Our next two Excel events are coming up. Our first will be in June in New York City. These events are day-long, not really conferences, but kind of mini conferences. We have a lot of technical sessions from Citrix experts, Citrix speakers, and then community Citrix experts as well. So they're free events. If you're in New York area, we'd love to have you. And even if you're not and you just want to travel into the city that day, definitely love to have you. After that will be our virtual Excel event. That's in July. It'll be so hot you won't want to leave your house. So we'll meet you online and have lots of great sessions for you there as well. We're still firming up our speaker agenda, but definitely take a look, and I'll put a link in the chat for you in just a little bit so that you can check out both of those events. Also, we'd love to invite you to our Slack and Discord channels. The channels are mirrored, so you don't have to join both, but you can if you like. You, by default, will enter into our general channels, and if you'd like to join your local group's private channel, there are instructions for how to do that. Once you get in, you can just let us know, and we'll add you to those private communities. But definitely join the conversations on Slack. It's a great place to ask questions, give advice, get advice, and just connect with your fellow CUGC members and folks at Citrix and NetScaler, I think, too. We got some of those in there as well. All right, a couple of details. We are recording today's session. You'll get a link to that recording tomorrow. I'll send that to you via email, along with any other resources that come out of this session that you need. I'll definitely make sure you have those. Do type your questions in the Q&A panel. We're going to get to as many questions as we can today. And so just type them in as you have them, and we'll do our best. Also, you can use the chat to talk to each other or comment on things, whatever you'd like to do. But we hope you'll put your questions in the Q&A pane so we can definitely see those and don't miss them in the chat. All right. Now, let me introduce our speakers today. We have Isaac Stasevich from Cloud Software Group. He is Senior Product Manager in Resiliency. Hello, Isaac.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, good. Glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We also have with us Jake Walsh. He is a Citrix technology advocate and a cloud architect based in the UK. Jake is going to keep an eye on the Q&A for us today. He's going to help facilitate that discussion. Hi, Jake, and thanks for being back on with us today.
Afternoon. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. Isaac, I'm going to hand things over to you. I'm going to stop my screen share and you can take charge and get us going and tell us more about what we're doing today.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Let's see if I can hide those meeting controls. All right. Want to thank everyone for joining me here today to talk a little bit more about service continuity and how it could help us protect our users during any DaaS outages. So before we begin, I wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is Isaac Stasevich. I'm a Senior Product Manager in the Citrix business unit of Cloud Software Group, focused on all things resiliency. I dropped my email address here. Hope you guys all write it down. Don't be shy to send me an email on anything resiliency related. I'm happy to start that conversation and yeah. So for a quick agenda, we're going to start with a survey. We want to see how familiar everyone is with service continuity. We'll talk about why we need it and why it's important and it should be important to your businesses. Talk about what this looks like for our end users during an outage and what they should be expecting to see. Talk a little bit about the technical details, get into the nitty-gritty there, and some overall tips and tricks. And then last, we'll have some time for questions. I do want to encourage everyone to ask questions in that Q&A section during the whole presentation. I'll be interacting with Jake to get some questions as we go through. So we'll go ahead and start off with that survey. Stephanie, can you get that survey started up?
Yes, I have it going right now. And Looks like,
I did see it pop up on my screen.
okay, good. Yeah, I was like, not, okay, there we go. I was like, I wasn't seeing any activity yet, so making sure that was working properly. Yep, I'll leave that open for a little bit because there's several questions there. All right, it looks like we've got a little over half responding. I'll leave it open just a little bit longer. And then I know, Isaac, you were interested in a couple of answers here, so I'll get this. I can basically, because I know there's some write-in questions. So I know one thing you were wanting to know was about, do you have service continuity enabled? And right now it looks like it's 40% no, 27% yes, and the rest is I don't know. So you do have a majority with no. Let's see, are you familiar with how service continuity works? And we've got about 59% on no and 41% on yes. So it looks like we've got some folks that are ready to learn today.
Awesome. Yeah. And actually those numbers kind of align with what we have, what we see in our own data. So glad to see, and hopefully this this kind of session can help bring those yeses to having service continuity configured up. All right, so my back is, Stephanie, does that mean that poll is done there?
Yes, I just shut it down.
Perfect. So now we'll move into why use service continuity. Why should service continuity be important to your business? So we all work in IT, and outages are an inherent aspect of IT systems. They happen to every company. They're unavoidable. So we're seeing a lot more organizations move to this design for failure approach. How can we overcome these outages and maintain access during those outage scenarios? So service continuity is one of those design for failure technologies. It's going to allow our end users to continue accessing their apps and desktops during service level outages. And what outages specifically can we overcome? Starting with the workspace service, that's that cloud hosted storefront. Moving on to the identity providers. So this could either, even if you're doing like a SAML identity provider, we can overcome an outage from that side of the house. Any broker service outages, secure ticket authority outages, even an internet connection on the LAN. If you can still reach those cloud connectors, you can overcome an outage that way. And last but not least, the gateway service. So if one of the points of presence go down, we can fail over to a different one. All right, Jake, I'll pause there for a second before we move into the next section. Any questions on why to use service continuity or what outages we can overcome?
Not at the moment. I have a really good question from John, but I think perhaps a little bit later on would be the best place for that, if that's okay.
Sounds good. So next is, what is this going to look like for our end users? If an outage comes up, one of those services go down, how is this going to impact our end users? What are they going to see? So from the workspace app, that the self-service side of things, any unavailable resources are going to be dimmed. So that would be mostly SaaS apps or on-prem aggregated apps. We could also set this at the delivery group level. So if any delivery groups don't have service continuity enabled, we could dim them there. And you'll see some of your resources are available to you. These are the ones that you can launch, and any ones that you cannot launch are going to be dimmed out. You'll also see users have that reconnect to workspace button. They can press that button to try to get that connection back, go back to online mode. But this is what it looks like when we're offline. So when a user actually goes in and launches one of those applications, they're going to go ahead and see this interactive logon prompt, right? We talked about how we could overcome some of those IDP outages. So part of that means we still have to authenticate. We're actually going to authenticate at our virtual delivery agent, the actual VM or server that's hosting our apps and desktops there. I guess each section I'll take a pause and make sure I didn't miss anything. Jake, any questions on the user experience side of the house there?
Just one question here from Jay that's just asking around sort of service continuity in general. Is it only available via the cloud service? There's no plans to bring that into on-premises deployments, for example?
Correct. It is only available on the workspace service side of the house at the moment.
Brill, thank you.
Yep. So moving on to the technical details, how does service continuity work? The main driver behind our service continuity are going to be these connection lease files. These connection lease files are going to be what's going to allow us to access those apps and those desktops during the outage scenarios. So connection lease files are distributed to actual endpoints. So every device is going to have their own set of connection lease files, and they're long-lived authorization tokens, not authentication tokens, but authorization tokens for the resources that are assigned to that user. So as soon as a user logs in, they're going to start this download process of getting those connection lease files to that endpoint. And we could set that authorization token to last from anywhere between 1 and 30 days. It's customizable. These connection lease files are per user and per endpoint. So it's specifically the resources that are assigned to me as a user, and it's specific to the endpoint that I am logging on to, or that I'm logged on with. So they are tamper-proof. If I take this connection lease file and put it on a different device, it will completely invalidate that connection lease file. So it's all AES 256 encrypted. So really tamper-proof. You can't really give yourself access to something that you don't have access to. The connection lease files, the actual information that they contain, are going to be the resources that are available to that user and information about the resource location and the cloud connectors inside that resource location. So how this works at launch time, the connection lease files are going to be what's used to enumerate the resource for the end user. So what they see on that workspace UI end page is going to be enumerated from those connection lease files. They're going to be what's telling the workspace app what should be grayed out and what is available to the end user. Once a user actually clicks an application to launch, those launch requests are sent either through the gateway service or directly to those cloud connectors to broker the connection. So as long as the broker service is up, our launch is going to proceed as normal. If the broker service is not available, that's one of the outages that we're experiencing. The localhost cache database on the connector is going to be used to broker that connection. And as we can see, both gateway service and direct connections are supported access methods. So we can have a direct ICA connection or the ICA proxy through the gateway service. We're going to take a high-level look at the architecture behind all of this and what helps it work. Stephanie, I gave you a link there. Would you mind posting that link in the chat for everyone to see? If you're more interested in what this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-step process is, feel free to look at our Tech Zone article on service continuity. But from a high level, I just wanted to speak to the fact that we have our endpoint device here on the bottom left. So we can see those connection lease files are synchronized to the endpoint device through that workspace app. We also support browser-based access, which we'll talk about in a bit. So we have the connection lease issuing and sync service. So that's going to be what's actually going to distribute those connection lease files to the endpoint device with the root of trust, keeping it secure. And then we're going to broker all of our connections through the cloud connector and be able to overcome any issues with the Citrix broker with that localhost database, localhost cache database on the cloud connector as well. So architecture diagrams always bring up a few questions. So Jake, I'll pause here and see if anything else has come up.
Yeah, I've got a really good one here. Alex has answered it in the chat, but I think it's just worth asking the question anyway, just for everybody on the call from John. Service continuity is off by default, I believe, and is there a charge for enabling that?
Like a cost, like
an additional
cost?
cost or licensing or anything like that. Yeah.
No, there's not an additional cost for enabling it.
Well, thank you. Another really good question here, I think particularly relevant to the architecture diagram here from question from Rudy. Do you have to log into resources prior to a failure occurring, or does this sort of provide some protection prior to that? I mean, Rudy's just called out that it's similar to the previous connection leasing features that from previous products.
Correct. So great question, and thanks for asking there. You do have to have logged into the Workspace app before in order for those lease files to synchronize to your endpoint. So it is per user. You have to have logged in. Once you log in, that download process starts. So the difference between this version of the connection leasing, one of the main differences between this version of connection leasing and the previous one is it's going to enumerate all of the applications that are available to you. My understanding of the previous iterations of connection leasing was you have to actually launch the application for it to be available to you during an outage. This case, you do not have to have launched previously. It is available as soon as you log in. All the resources that should be enumerated to you are available, but you do have to have logged in before.
Well, thank you. Just one other question here, if that's okay, from Amit. How long is the connection lease file valid for? So does that have an expiry period, or does it stop working after a certain time? And just one other part to that question, if it's okay as well, it's just, are there any downsides to enabling it? Is there any sort of considerations for CPU overhead or anything like that that we should be aware of?
So the first question was the validity of that authorization token is going to be, by default, that's 7 days, but that is configurable between 1 and 30 days. So totally up to your organization as to how long you want that authorization token to live. They're also revocable. So if you find out a device was compromised, you can go in and revoke that connection lease file. In terms of downsides to enabling it, no CPU overhead. I have heard some customers say that the reconnect to workspace button is slightly misleading from an end user standpoint, but overall, I don't see any downsides to enabling more access to resources during outages.
Brilliant, thank you. We have got a couple more questions, but I'll save those for the next pause, if that's okay.
That works. Thanks, Jake. So we talked a little bit about some of those grayed out resources. So talking about what is available during outages, any of your applications, any hosted shared desktops, so that's desktops hosted on server multi-session operating systems, any static or dedicated desktops, as well as pooled desktops and remote PCs. So the one kind of star that we have there is anything, if you have a pool of persistent desktops that aren't assigned to end users yet, those are not available. So assign on first use is not available during an outage. Pretty much all of your other apps and desktops use cases are supported. A couple things that aren't supported. One is going to be SaaS apps that won't be supported through the Workspace app itself, and any on-prem aggregated resources. So if you are doing, if you have the Workspace service and you're aggregating on-prem resources from a delivery controller, those will also be grayed out. So I think this is a common misconception, is that service continuity doesn't work in the browser, because it absolutely does. We do need a browser plugin installed into our browser for it to work, but it is supported on Chrome, Edge, and Safari. So this is going to enable an offline mode in our browser as well and leverage those connection lease files. So if you have that browser extension installed, you could go ahead and keep launching during outages on your browser as well. We see that a lot of people are coming through that browser, and we're excited about that technology. All right, Jake, you want to hit me with a few more questions before we move into tips and tricks?
Yes, please. Yeah, I've got two pretty similar questions here actually around sort of security aspects. So, are there any additional sort of security exclusions, perhaps on the endpoint that need to be considered for service continuity? And then just a slightly different take on the security. Are there any concerns around potentially that being used to bypass MFA, for example?
So the MFA one is an interesting question. So we think of MFA as you have to know something and you have to have something. And because these connection lease files are per endpoint, you have to have the device and know the password. So even that is kind of a form of MFA. And then on top of that, you have to have logged in on using your MFA provider previously in order to get those files in the first place. It's up to your organization if you feel that's sufficient, but in our eyes, we feel that having the endpoint, knowing the password, and having logged in using MFA previously should be a sufficient security posture there. And the other question I didn't quite understand, Jake, do you mind just repeating that one more time?
Yeah, no worries, thank you. So it was just around additional security exclusions. So are there any sort of, I guess, additional considerations that need to be put in place to use service continuity?
I don't know that there would be any additional security on the endpoint that I would recommend putting in place to use service continuity. Like I mentioned, you can revoke those connection lease files if you know an endpoint is compromised. And then on top of that, you have to, still have to know your password and have the device and get into the device in order to launch an app or desktop. So I wouldn't say any additional security on the endpoint in order to have that enabled.
Real, thank you. Just another one here, well, two actually that I think are relevant. So I'll just go through these two. One from Amit. Is there a way to simulate failure in this so we can actually test service continuity out?
Yeah, and actually that's going to be part of our tips and tricks section. So we'll take a look at that as well.
Jump the gun there, yeah. And just one more from Michael, if that's okay. Are there any scenarios we should be aware of that it doesn't cover? Often sort of continuity aspects, services, things like this. Sometimes people use those as we don't need to plan for any disasters because we've got this feature. But is there anything we should specifically be aware of that it won't cover us for example?
The one big outage that we can't overcome is an outage to our virtual delivery agents or the actual servers that are hosting our apps and our desktops. So we still need access to the resources that we are accessing. So absolutely still plan for DR, especially at the VDA level there. But that's going to be the big one that we can't overcome. Outside of that, most outages we are protected for within service continuity, but I would still say that this is, you want your end users launching in normal operations. This is a backup in case those normal operations aren't working. So we should still be planning for DR. It should be an important strategy for any IT organization.
Brilliant, thank you.
All right, so there are a couple of things that, it's just some lesser known maybe configurations that within service continuity that I would definitely recommend taking a look into. So one of those is we can improve our user experience during outages by enabling direct connections. So if you actually have access to that VDA, you can connect directly like a direct ICA connection. But if you're coming from the external network, fall back to the gateway service. So enabling that hybrid connectivity for resource leases is something I'd recommend. There are all these links are here in the deck. The deck will be shared at the end of this session for if you'd like to take a look further. So another one is if a user explicitly goes and selects to log out of the workspace app, those connection lease files are removed from the device. So we have the option to configure that if your end users are logging off their devices at the end of the day or logging off the workspace app specifically at the end of the day, you may want to maintain those leases on log off. So something to consider there. One of those questions that you asked there, Jake, was if the lease validity is configurable. It absolutely is. By default, that is 7 days, but you can configure that for anywhere between 1 and 30 days. If the broker service goes down and we are in an outage mode, you want to consider configuring reused machines without shutdown and outage on delivery groups. That'll enable us to continue using pooled desktops during outages to the broker service. A couple other things I mentioned earlier, these lease files can be revoked if you find out an end user or a device is compromised. And last, we talked about what the user experience is going to be. We want to make sure our end users are continuing to, be productive during these outage scenarios. So make sure that they know that they will have to type in their username and password, and that they can continue to do their work if they do that during those outages. And then testing, back to that other question. So there's a couple of different ways that we could actually invoke service continuity. One, for me, the way I find it easiest, what I normally do for testing is just going into my host file on my Windows device and creating a dummy record for whatever your cloud workspace URL is. And you'll see once you can no longer communicate with the workspace service, your workspace app will automatically fail over into outage mode, and you may see some of those gray icons, or you'll definitely see that reconnect to workspace button on the top. You could also trigger localhost cache on your cloud connectors. There is a registry key that you can do to trigger that. That's a way you could test the broker service going down, and you can see how end users won't really be impacted by that at all. I will say, if you do this on production cloud connectors, do be cautious, because there will be an impact to end users, as VDAs have to re-register with the secondary broker service there. So just be mindful if you're doing that on your cloud connectors. Definitely do it on a test environment if you have one. And then last is, if you leave the logon prompt of the UI for the workspace app or in the browser for about 40 seconds, you'll actually be prompted to go into an outage mode and use those connection lease files. So there are a few different ways that you could test and trigger this. You could also do this on a per delivery group basis. So if you have a test delivery group, you could just enable it for that test delivery group and keep it disabled for everything else. There's a lot of different options that we could do for testing and taking a look at that. So hopefully that clears things up and answers that question. But if there's any follow-ups, please do be sure to ask them in the chat. All right, so I know we had some questions throughout, but Jake, any follow-up ones here now?
I got a good one here from John, actually, around, so if one of the services goes down, so something like a gateway service, perhaps, just to confirm, so if there's no line of sight to a VDA because of an outage or something like that, obviously that would still be a limitation. That's still something people would need to plan for and have a workaround in place. So
the gateway service is a multi-cloud solution for us. So we see the uptime on our gateway service to be relatively high. If the gateway service were to go down absolutely and completely, that would be that would cause an outage. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just having a look at the other questions. I have another one from John here, which was kind of one of the earlier questions, but I think perhaps better to answer it now as we're sort of further down the road. And this is a question around, if you use service continuity, for example, and you are looking at perhaps hosting in different cloud environments, what are the advantages of doing this over, perhaps another VDI solution? So giving you the option to actually, still maintain sessions when the control aspect's down. But obviously, are there any other aspects we should be aware of that make this, a great solution?
I guess I'm not following the comparison, like service continuity as compared to a different VDI solution, which.
So in terms of the question is around, when you have an environment that's, where you're trying to prepare against or prevent cloud outages, mm-hmm. Obviously this is quite unique in the sense of it provides something that other environments don't.
Yeah, I would say that the types of outages that we could overcome is going to be the big advantage here, right? An IDP outage is something that we could overcome with this solution. So
absolutely,
I think that's a pretty big one in terms of, even the, more stuff that we don't have control over that we could overcome. Even potentially an internet connection on the LAN, if we have direct connection to the connector and the VDAs, we can still have access to our resources. So I would say just the different outages that you could overcome with this are pretty powerful in terms of a design for failure solution.
Definitely.
I think I hope I answered that. If I didn't,
no, that's
that's
perfect. Sorry, my paraphrasing of the question wasn't the best yet, so I apologise. Just one question here from Lucretia. Apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but is it sort of this service still open to devices like thin clients as well? And I guess that's probably a slightly challenging question to answer because it will depend on the client, but you know, is it purely sort of a browser-based service? So if a thin client has the right browser and plugins, they could still take advantage of it.
So these are per user per device, and they're downloaded at logon. So if it's a thin client, a one-to-one thin client device, I think we have support for both iGel and HP. We're still working with Dell to try to get Dell Wise, but iGel and HP are supported at the moment. So we do have support for one-to-one thin client devices. With kiosk thin client devices, there are a little bit more challenges because this is per user and you have to have logged on before. Those are some solutions that we're still looking and trying to overcome. It's definitely on our roadmap, but we don't support kiosk mode thin clients at the moment.
Cool. Thank you. Another question here from John. Does this so if you're logged on and you have to invoke service continuity and connect via it, does that connect to an existing session or does it create a new or duplicate session?
It could create net new sessions. It doesn't have to have, the session doesn't have to have started before you go. So if the broker service is online but you're invoking service continuity, it will still use that service, that broker service to broker connections as normal. And if broker service isn't available, it's going to act similar to the way localhost cache works. So net new connections are possible, or existing connections are also possible.
Awesome, thank you. Just one more, if that's okay, from Brian. So if a user accesses the service via a browser, but doesn't have the plugin within the browser, but has the native sort of the workspace app installed, would it still function, or is it purely down to that browser plugin that's required?
So that browser plugin is what's going to actually allow your browser to interact with those connection lease files on your device. So without the browser plugin, you won't be able to trigger offline mode in your browser. If you've logged in with a workspace app, you could still go in with the workspace app and launch through there. But without the plugin, you won't be able to launch during an outage on your browser. There's ways that we're working on getting that, that plugin a little bit more in front of our end user spaces to increase adoption of that. But as of now, through the browser, the plugin is required.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's everything for now.
Awesome. I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody for joining. Really appreciate you guys hopping on. I hope this answered a lot of questions and maybe even spark some more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and throw my my email in the chat again here. Actually, Jake, would you mind dropping my email address? It's my first dot my last name at cloud.com there.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Awesome. Thank you. Would love to hear from everybody. Hope you guys enjoyed the session. All feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you all for joining.
All right, thank you so much. As I mentioned, I'll send out the recording link tomorrow. I will also, I think I'm going to get you all of these questions, a transcript for you from this discussion, as well as the chat, so you can follow up if you need to. And yeah, definitely reach out to him if you have more questions, or us at CUGC, either way. And thanks. Thanks, Jake. Thanks for being on again today.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you at another CUGC event again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.